A simple walk with my dog turned into a nightmare when three men thought I was an easy target. What they didn't know was that my dog Baxter wasn't just a pet. He was their worst nightmare. They thought they could get away, but the ending of the story taught them a lesson they'll never forget. Let's start from the beginning. My name is Clara Jenkins. I'm 67 years old and have lived in this neighborhood long enough to know when something feels off. Usually, it's a quiet area, tucked away from the city's chaos, but sometimes quiet can be deceiving. Every evening around 10 p.m., I take my dog Baxter out for a walk. It's our little ritual, just me, him, and the cool night air. Baxter isn't just any dog. He's a German Shepherd, big enough to intimidate anyone who doesn't know him and smart enough to outwit most people who do. What makes him truly special is his history. He used to be a police K9. After years of service, he retired due to an injury, and I was lucky enough to take him in. He's not just my companion, he's my shadow, my protector. That night felt no different until I turned the corner. Three men stood under a flickering streetlight, their silhouettes stretching across the pavement. Something about their stance, the way they huddled together, made my stomach twist. Baxter felt it too. His ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. One of the men noticed us and smirked, nudging his friend. "Hey, look at that," he called out, his tone mocking. "Grandma's out for a stroll with her big bad wolf." The other two laughed, their voices echoing in the still night. "Yeah, maybe she's training him to fetch her groceries," another chimed in, his laugh sharp and mean. Baxter stepped closer to me, his body tense. His growl grew louder, a clear warning. As they started walking toward us, my heart raced. Panic tried to claw its way in, but I pushed it down. I've lived through enough to know that fear is like blood to sharks. It only makes them bolder. The tallest of the three tilted his head, his smirk widening. "Relax, lady," he said, holding out his hands in mock innocence. "We're just saying hello. No need for the guard dog act." But I knew better. Baxter knew better. His growl turned into a bark, sharp and commanding, like he was daring them to come closer. And that's when I realized this wasn't just some harmless teasing. These men had a different kind of intent in their eyes. I tightened my grip on Baxter's leash and braced myself. Whatever they were planning, they had no idea what they were about to face. One of the men reached into his pocket and pulled out something metallic. The streetlight caught it, making it gleam in a way that sent a chill down my spine. It looked sharp, like something you'd use in the kitchen, but definitely not for cooking. "Don't worry, Grandma," he said with a grin that made my skin crawl. "This'll be over before you even blink." My breath hitched, but I wasn't about to let them see fear on my face. My legs, though, they didn't get the memo. They started trembling, but I planted my feet, determined to hold my ground. Baxter, on the other hand, wasn't fazed in the slightest. His growl grew louder, deeper, so low it felt like it vibrated through the air. His fur stood on end, and he took a step forward, placing himself squarely between me and the men. The tallest one chuckled, nudging his friend. "What's this mutt gonna do, huh? Bark us to death?" Baxter barked sharply in response, the sound echoing through the empty street. It wasn't a bark you'd hear from a regular dog. It was a warning, a challenge. The shortest guy, who had been quiet up until now, shrugged. "Let's just show her who's in charge and be done with it." It was like they thought this was a game. Baxter barked again, louder this time, taking another step forward. His movements were deliberate, almost calculated. It was like he was sizing them up, deciding which one to take down first. "All right, Grandma," the tall one said, taking a step toward me. "Call off your dog or—" He didn't get to finish that sentence. Baxter lunged forward, stopping just short of him, teeth bared, growling like thunder. The guy jumped back, holding up his hands. Whoa, okay, chill out, mutt." But Baxter wasn't chilling out. He was locked in, ready to protect me at all costs. And me? I tightened my grip on his leash, my voice steady despite the adrenaline racing through my veins. "Baxter doesn't back down," I said, staring them down. "So, unless you want to find out what happens next, I'd suggest you rethink your life choices." They didn't know who Baxter really was, but they were about to find out. The guy with the sharp-looking object stepped closer, his grin gone, replaced with an ugly glare. He raised it in the air like he was trying to prove a point, aiming it toward Baxter. "Let's see how tough your dog really is," he snarled, taking another step. Big mistake. Before he could make his move, Baxter darted forward like lightning, jaws snapping onto the man's arm with precision. It wasn't a wild attack. It was calculated, deliberate, the kind of move that screamed, "I've been trained for this." The man let out a scream that shattered the eerie silence of the street. "Get this crazy dog off me," he shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to shake Baxter off. Spoiler alert, Baxter wasn't letting go. The other two men froze for a second, their bravado crumbling into wide-eyed panic. "What the heck is wrong with this dog?" one of them stammered, his voice a mix of shock and disbelief. Baxter, still holding the first guy by the arm, gave a sharp tug, yanking him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. The metallic object clattered onto the pavement, forgotten as the man writhed, trying to free himself. "Get off me!" he yelled again, his tone growing more desperate. The taller one snapped out of his shock, rushing forward. "We've got to take him down," he shouted, grabbing a chunk of wood from the ground. The third guy hesitated, clearly second-guessing his life choices, but followed anyway, muttering under his breath, "This dog's not normal." They came at us together, their movements frantic, but Baxter didn't even flinch. His body tensed, his focus razor-sharp. "Baxter, watch out!" I yelled, stepping back as one of them swung the wooden piece. But Baxter moved with the kind of agility that no regular dog could match. He dodged the swing effortlessly, releasing the first man's arm and shifting his attention to the taller one. With a deep growl, he lunged, knocking the man backward like a linebacker, going for a tackle. The guy hit the ground with a loud thud, gasping as Baxter stood over him, teeth bared, daring him to try anything else. Okay, I get it," the man stuttered, holding up his hands in surrender. The third guy? He didn't even try to step in. He just stood there wide-eyed, looking like he was rethinking every decision that had led him to this moment. "This isn't just some dog," he whispered, his voice shaking. And he was absolutely right. Baxter wasn't just some dog. He was a former officer, trained to handle situations exactly like this. But the fight wasn't over yet. These guys weren't ready to back down. Not yet. And Baxter wasn't done showing them what real strength looks like. It happened fast. The other two snapped out of their hesitation and lunged at us. One of them grabbed a rusty metal pipe that had been lying on the ground and swung it with all the force he could muster. "Stay back," I shouted, panic creeping into my voice. But Baxter wasn't about to be caught off guard. He sidestepped the swing like it was nothing, his movements quick and precise. The guy stumbled forward, thrown off balance by the force of his own swing, and Baxter wasted no time. He barked sharply, leaping forward just enough to make the man drop the pipe. "Are you kidding me?" the guy yelled, his voice breaking as he backed away, his confidence clearly shaken. While that was happening, the third guy thought he'd be clever and sneak up behind me. Big mistake. I felt a tug on my shoulder and turned just in time to see him reaching for me. My heart pounded, but instead of freezing up, I gripped my handbag tightly and swung it with everything I had. The bag connected with a solid thunk, right on the side of his head. "Don't even think about it, buddy," I snapped, adrenaline surging through me. The guy stumbled back, clutching his head. "What the heck, lady?" he shouted, looking more offended than hurt. Meanwhile, Baxter was handling the guy with the pipe. After disarming him, Baxter lunged, knocking him flat on his back with a force that seemed impossible for a dog. The man let out a yelp as he hit the pavement, and Baxter stood over him, teeth bared, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Get it off me! Help me!" the guy wailed, his tough guy act completely shattered. The third guy, still rubbing his head, looked between me and Baxter, his face pale. "This is insane," he muttered, taking a step back. "Oh, you're just figuring that out now?" I shot back, gripping my bag like it was a weapon. The guy on the ground squirmed under Baxter, his voice rising in desperation. "Call it off. Please. I'm done." Baxter didn't move, his eyes locked on the man like a hawk watching its prey. He wasn't attacking, just letting him know who was in charge. "Baxter, stay," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The two remaining men looked at each other, clearly questioning every life choice they'd made up until this point. For a brief moment, everything was still, but I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The chaos finally seemed to hit a boiling point. Baxter had one guy pinned to the ground. Another was stumbling back after my handbag's not so gentle reminder to stay away. And the third? Oh, he was done. He turned and bolted like his shoes were on fire. For a second, I thought about letting him go. But Baxter? Oh no. Baxter wasn't about to let the fun end that easily. In a flash, he was off. It was like watching a heat-seeking missile lock onto its target. The guy barely made it 10 steps before Baxter cut him off, standing in his path like an immovable force. The man froze, his hands shooting into the air like he was at some kind of surprise police checkpoint. Okay, I give up, he shouted, his voice cracking. Just call off the dog, please. Baxter didn't budge. He stared the man down, his tail stiff and his whole body screaming, "You're not going anywhere, pal." Meanwhile, I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking a little less now that I had the upper hand. I dialed the police, keeping one eye on the two guys who were still within Baxter's growling range. "Yes, I need officers at Parkside Avenue," I said, my voice steady. 3 men tried to attack me, but my dog stopped them. They're still here. One of the guys groaned from the ground. "Stopped us? Lady, your dog's a maniac." I glanced down at him, raising an eyebrow. "Maniac? No, sweetheart. That's just years of training." The third guy, still standing with his hands up, let out a frustrated sigh. "This is all your fault, Grandma. If you just..." I cut him off with a look sharp enough to slice through his whining. "My fault?" I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. No. This is what happens when 3 grown men think it's a great idea to mess with a 67-year-old woman walking her dog. This isn't on me, it's on your poor decision-making skills. Baxter let out a single bark, as if to say, exactly. The guy on the ground groaned again, clearly realizing he wasn't going anywhere soon. "Can't you just, let us go? We learned our lesson, I swear." I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Let me think about that. Nope. As the sound of sirens approached in the distance, I crossed my arms, looking at the 3 of them. "You messed with the wrong grandma," I said, smiling just enough to drive the point home. Baxter stood tall, his gaze never leaving the man in front of him, as if to say, "Game over, boys." The wail of sirens grew louder, and within moments, 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing, casting a red and blue glow across the street. The 3 men looked like they'd just seen their worst nightmare roll into town, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely inaccurate. The first officer stepped out, scanning the scene. His eyes landed on Baxter, who was still standing guard over the ringleader. For a second, his professional demeanor cracked, and he let out a laugh. "No way. Is that Baxter?" he said, his voice filled with genuine surprise. Baxter glanced at him, tail wagging ever so slightly as if to say, "Yeah, it's me. What took you so long?" "You know my dog?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. The officer grinned, kneeling slightly to get a better look at Baxter. "Know him? I worked with this guy back when he was on the force. Best K9 we ever had. Took down more suspects than half the precinct combined." The second officer, who was younger and clearly new, stared at Baxter like he was looking at some kind of legend. "Wait, this is the Baxter? The one from the training videos?" "That's the one," the first officer said, shaking his head in disbelief. Meanwhile, the men on the ground started protesting. "This is ridiculous. We weren't doing anything wrong," one of them yelled, trying to scramble to his feet. Baxter let out a sharp bark, and the guy froze mid-motion, dropping back onto the pavement like he'd just remembered who was in charge here. "Right," the officer said, pulling out his notepad. "And I guess your buddy just happened to be waving around a sharp object for fun?" "I wasn't gonna use it," the man stammered, his voice cracking. "It was just, for show." The second officer pointed to a security camera mounted on a nearby building. "Well, let's see what the footage has to say about that." I couldn't help but smirk as the men exchanged panicked looks. They were cooked, and they knew it. As the officers cuffed the men and began loading them into the patrol cars, the first officer turned back to me. "Ma'am, I gotta say, you and Baxter handled yourselves better than most people would have. If it weren't for you two, this could have ended a lot worse." I shrugged, giving Baxter a quick pat on the head. "Well, I wasn't exactly alone, was I? He's the real hero here." The officer smiled, shaking his head again. You know, it's funny. Even back in the day, Baxter always seemed to know who the bad guys were. Guess that hasn't changed. As they drove off with the three troublemakers in tow, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and pride. My Baxter wasn't just any dog. He was a protector, a partner, and, apparently, still a bit of a legend. "Come on, buddy," I said, tugging lightly on his leash. "Let's go home." And with that, we left the flashing lights behind, ready to put the night's chaos where it belonged, far in the past. By the next morning, it felt like the entire neighborhood, and half the city, had heard about what happened. Local news outlets were buzzing with headlines like "Senior Citizen and Her Hero Dog Take Down Would-Be Attackers" and "Ex-K9 Officer Saves the Day." I wasn't expecting all the attention, but apparently, the police officer's account of the incident had spread like wildfire. And once people found out about Baxter's past as a police dog, it was like the story wrote itself. Before I even finished my morning coffee, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find a small army of reporters and camera crews camped out on my front lawn. "Miss Jenkins, can we get a statement?" One of them called out, shoving a microphone in my direction. Another chimed in, "How does it feel to have a dog that's being called a local hero?" Baxter, ever the professional, stood tall next to me, his ears perked up like he was ready for his close-up. I adjusted my robe, doing my best to look calm and collected despite the chaos. "Well," I said, glancing down at Baxter, "I'd say I'm feeling a lot better than those three fools from last night." The reporters laughed, scribbling notes and snapping photos of Baxter, who looked like he knew exactly what was going on. "Miss Jenkins," one of them asked, "what would you say to the people who are calling Baxter a hero?" I smirked. "I'd say they're absolutely right. But let's be honest, he's just doing what he's always done, protecting people, taking care of business. That's just who he is." The attention didn't stop there. Throughout the day, deliveries started showing up at my door. Dog treats, chew toys, even handwritten thank you notes from strangers. One package included a shiny new collar with a tag that read, "Baxter the Brave." "You're famous now, buddy," I said, holding up the collar for him to see. His tail wagged, but he still had that calm, stoic look that said, "Yeah, I know. I've earned it." Later that afternoon, a neighbor stopped by with her young daughter, who shyly handed me a crayon drawing of Baxter standing under a superhero cape. "Thank you for keeping our neighborhood safe," the little girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. Baxter leaned down to nuzzle her hand, and I felt my heart swell. "That's what we're here for," I said, giving Baxter a scratch behind the ears. By the time the sun set, the reporters had finally packed up and the house was quiet again. I sat on the couch with Baxter at my side, scrolling through social media posts about our little adventure. The comments ranged from, "What a legend," to, "Can we get a Baxter statue in the park?" "Not bad for a retired officer, huh?" I said, leaning down to kiss the top of his head. He gave me a look that said, "Just another day at the office." Justice had been served. And Baxter? Well, he'd earned himself a well-deserved nap. A few weeks later, I was walking Baxter along our usual route when something caught my eye. Right at the corner where it all went down, there was a shiny new plaque mounted on a post. It read, "Here, Baxter, the hero dog, protected his owner, Clara Jenkins, with bravery and loyalty." I stopped, staring at it for a moment, and then looked down at Baxter. His ears perked up as he sniffed the air, completely unaware of his newfound celebrity status. "Well, would you look at that, buddy?" I said, crouching down to ruffle his fur. "They gave you your very own sign. Guess you're officially a big deal now." Baxter wagged his tail, giving me a look that said, "Told you I was special." The neighborhood felt a little different now, safer, more connected. People would wave as we passed by, and a few kids even ran up to pet Baxter, calling him Superdog or the Legend. As for me, life pretty much went back to normal. I still walked Baxter every night, still enjoyed my coffee on the porch in the mornings, but that night, it stuck with me. Not just because of what happened, but because of what it reminded me about courage. Courage isn't just about being strong or fearless. It's about trusting the ones who stand by your side. It's about knowing you don't have to face things alone. And those three men? Let's just say, I hope they got the message loud and clear. Never mess with Clara Jenkins and her dog. As we headed home, I glanced back at the plaque one more time, smiling to myself. Baxter trotted beside me, calm and confident, ready for whatever life threw at us next. Because if there's one thing I learned from that night, it's this. Sometimes the biggest lessons come from the most unexpected heroes. And in this story, Baxter was the hero we all needed. The story was written to remind us all of the importance of courage, honesty, and standing up for what's right. It's a testament to how loyalty and bravery, whether from a person or a beloved dog, can make a difference in the world. Let this be a lesson that kindness and justice always prevail, and that even in the toughest situations, doing the right thing will lead to the best outcomes. Baxter's story isn't just about heroism. It's about the power of trust, teamwork, and the belief that good will always triumph over bad. Stay kind, stay brave, and never forget, justice always wins.